Welcome everybody. Welcome to today's SMPTE Standards webcast. I'm your host, Joel Welch, SMPTE's Director of Education. And if I can click on that. Want to welcome everybody to today's webcast. During a recent board strategy session, we decided, or the board decided, that promoting and educating folks on SMPTE standards should be a priority. So we, in that spirit, going to talk about one of the important standards, SMPTE DCP, and our two panelists are experts in that area for sure. I do want to take a couple of minutes to go through some housekeeping as we normally do. If this is your first time, the Standards Update webcasts are a series of webcasts. They're not quite monthly yet, but that may occur in the future. They are free to everybody. Where our monthly webcasts, our educational webcasts, are member benefit, the standards webcasts are free to everybody, and they are recorded for on-demand viewing and typically posted to YouTube so that we can make sure that as many people as possible understand SMPTE standards and hopefully raise awareness of the organization and the important work that our volunteers are doing in the area of standards development. Views and opinions expressed during the SMPTE webcast are those of the presenters and do not necessarily reflect those of SMPTE or SMPTE members. This webcast is presented for informational purposes only. Any reference to specific products or services do not represent promotion, recommendation, or endorsement by SMPTE or SMPTE members. We have two special speakers today. We have Mr. Chris Witham, Director of Digital Cinema Technology for Walt Disney Studios, and Mr. Nick Mitchell, who is Vice President of Digital Content, Services and Innovation for Deluxe, Technicolor Digital Cinema. And gentlemen, the floor is yours. You just need to click on the slide, and when you do, you should have control.
All right. Hi, this is Chris. We're going to let Nick go first. He's going to cover the technical aspects of it, and then I'll weigh in on the on our experience delivering a couple of SMPTE packages to the United States. So with that, over to you, Nick.
Thanks, Chris. So I'll start off by going over the agenda. We'll begin with some info about what a SMPTE DCP is, how SMPTE DCPs compare to the Interop DCPs we've all come to know and or love. I'll go over some of the benefits and new features of SMPTE DCP. We'll talk a little bit about some of the challenges associated with the transition to support the format. And then we'll discuss some of the testing activities in both the US and the EU. After that, we'll talk about some of the real-world results from the testing that's been taking place, talk a little bit about the next steps, and Chris will provide some of the studio perspective on the initiative. And then we'll wrap up with a summary and open things up for questions. So I think the best way to describe a SMPTE DCP is actually to compare it to an Interop DCP. For anyone not familiar with the subject, we've been distributing what's referred to as an Interop DCP since around 2005. The MXF Interop specifications underneath Interop were an ad hoc effort between the competing manufacturers of the time to define a package that would play on all of the devices. At that time, we were also, as an aside, using MPEG-2 as the codec. The idea all the time was that work would simultaneously commence to standardize things formally in SMPTE, and we would all just make the change to SMPTE standard packages in a few years. Cut to 12 years later. So anyway, the first thing you'll notice is that they're different colors. And this is really meant to highlight first and foremost that the files are all fundamentally different. You cannot mix and match Interop and SMPTE assets or files within a DCP. and expect it to work on anything. Further to this point, SMPTE and Interop DCPs can't even coexist in the same directory on a distribution drive, although this has more to do with their similarities and the fact that some older operating systems have trouble telling the difference between asset map and asset map.xml. You may notice that the asset map and vol index files actually gain a .xml file extension in SMPTE DCP. Under the hood, the SMPTE composition playlist got a lot of work and some additional features. SMPTE picture and audio MXF track files are new using standardized labeling and metadata. And the subtitle and caption files are now wrapped as optionally encrypted MXF files in SMPTE DCP, including the font and or PNG files that they reference, as opposed to an Interop DCP where the subtitle XML files and the fonts and PNGs they reference were contained within directories, kind of raw. So SMPTE DCP brings with it a host of new features, some of which are inherent in the architecture of the packages, and we'll go over some of that in more detail in a minute. And some of them are next-gen digital cinema technologies that are leveraging the standards and the flexibility and extensibility that they provide. I myself think that one of the biggest features of SMPTE DCP is SMPTE itself. And this is a feature that I don't really think gets the credit or attention that it deserves all the time. SMPTE actually provides us all a formal environment to deal with issues as they come up. And don't get me wrong, we have some great industry support mechanisms established, but we often need something concrete to reference when we're trying to work through issues. Subtitles themselves have had, and frankly continue to have, a tremendous amount of work done to them. ST 428-7, the 2014 rendition, adds rendering intent detail, Z position, and variable Z support for stereo subtitling, support for multiple font files per reel, effect details, and native composition frame rate edit units. SMPTE DCP supports wrapping the sub-XMLs, as I mentioned, with optional encryption, and this actually helps us on the MXF files actually help us a lot with some of the editorial and conform functions within the composition playlist. Regarding the 3D context subtitles themselves, this is actually one of the bigger challenges that we continue to face. These can currently be mastered, but are not supported in the field 100%. And in some cases, the playback devices are left to render the subtitles. Composition playlist metadata. This is one that's very near and dear to my heart. Metadata is data about data. The primary goal in the initiative was really to kill the reliance on the now really heavily overloaded digital cinema naming convention and the need to effectively decode the content title text and annotation text fields. And it provides human-readable information about the details of the composition, including but not limited to the actual full title of the movie. This is expected to ease the pain of content management significantly. The format also provides a very extensible architecture to enable rapid development and deployment of new features without putting systems that may not support them at risk. Obviously, I should mention, and we'll get into this a bit later in the deck, this risk mitigation is only applicable if all the devices in the field are upgraded to support SMPTE DCP. This is an eye chart. No, really, this is actually just an example of CPL metadata, and as you can see, we get a lot of bang for our buck with this one. Sometimes just a small amount of data is needed to make life a lot better. SMPTE DCP also supports markers. identifying things like the first and last frames of credits, intermission, etc. This is to assist in driving automation events in the cinema, typically for lights up and lights down stuff. Current practice for communicating these details actually involves physically printing what are referred to as the credits offsets on the hard drives that we send to theaters, and theater managers are then transposing these details into their respective systems. I'm sure you can imagine that this happens perfectly all the time. So the issue's actually gotten so pervasive that websites are starting to database this information. So providing it embedded within the composition playlist metadata is definitely the right way to go. As I mentioned earlier, there are a number of immersive cinema technologies leveraging SMPTE DCP. Things like immersive audio, high dynamic range picture, multi-screen presentations, and an expanded set of frame rates, including guaranteed support for 25 frames per second, which is an important feature. Really defined in the standard specifications, that you'll see more and more things pop up that are reliant on the predictability that it provides. So the transition to SMPTE DCP is not without its challenges, because SMPTE standards have been in development for a longer period of time than I think we all initially planned. It gave the Interop format a chance to become deeply ingrained in the industry. And as the work needed to get software updates to support SMPTE is by no means inconsequential, vendors understandably didn't really want to wait for, or they wanted to wait for standards to be completed before making these significant efforts required. You know, distributors that support the transition will inevitably need to support dual inventory in the mastering, QC, and to some extent the distribution of content. Chris will talk about that a little bit more. And while most vendors have provided resources to support the transition free of charge, this isn't always the case. And things like the expiration of VPF agreements add significant complexity to this. Because everything in the chain really needs to be updated to support SMPTE DCP, there's a heavy IT-ish proficiency requirement. And this is difficult and sometimes very expensive hill for some exhibitors to climb. The complexity of the landscape, especially in territories that have experienced multiple waves of integration, make things that much tougher, really. And although I would hope that after this presentation, everyone will see the benefits of the format and the power that having a formal process and environment for issue resolution brings, there has been a lack of perceived benefits from some in the exhibition community. And you know, some of the exhibitors may have to invest in new equipment, and you know, as I mentioned earlier, the subsidized cost structure of the VPFs starting to expire. This is getting harder day by day for some to swallow. So Deluxe Technicolor Digital Cinema has been actively engaged in the development and support of SMPTE DCP rollout. There have been a number of key staff members participating in SMPTE and supporting industry associations for many years. And in 2014, we established SMPTE working groups across all of our facilities worldwide. We're doing internal development and testing to ensure systems and processes throughout the pipeline are fully compliant with and capable of leveraging the latest SMPTE standards. DTDC has also regularly hosted some of the Plugfest events where we get together with the major vendors to support the development initiative and work through issues. And over the last few months, we also brought every member of staff through a presentation not dissimilar to this one, interestingly. To go through some of the testing activities, over the last 2 or 3 years, we've had a pretty good uptick in the industry. The ISDCF, Inter-Society Digital Cinema Forum, and the EDCF, European Digital Cinema Forum, these are working groups established to support the rollout of digital cinema in general. They've both been very active in assisting the transition to SMPTE DCP, each creating and distributing test materials to help exhibitors verify SMPTE readiness and work through the issues that arise along the way. They sent out test content recently. The test content was unencrypted and included full SMPTE feature sets, including CPL metadata, markers, time text, subtitles, and it was all mastered in multiple reels. The EDCF, with the support of Golflex and Unique and Film Kino Norway, recently actually conducted test distributions to the Netherlands and Norway, respectively. Both territories are 100% digital screens, each with coverage from a single electronic delivery vendor. They both set up localized online forums to capture exhibitor feedback and translated the supporting documentation into local languages to ease the process. And they conducted all of this towards the end of last year. As you can see, the results were quite positive with 100% feedback from both territories. 161 sites in the Netherlands and 202 sites in Norway. Some ingest issues, some playback and sync issues, some audio routing issues, but primarily all of these issues, I'd say 99% of them were resolved locally, primarily via software updates. Testing will only continue to ramp up as things work out. A few major studios have already completed SMPTE test feature releases, with more planned in 2016. We have more Plugfest planned to continue the test devices that we've been looking at, and hopefully more of them will show up to help push things along. The rollout will be quite diverse, with the EU likely to follow kind of territory lines, whereas the US and Canada present some added complexity as they've experienced multiple kind of diffuse integration efforts, some of which, as I mentioned, were under VPF agreements that have now expired, leaving some exhibitors on their own to source service providers and directly finance their efforts. In 2015, we completed 4 distributions. In 2016, Disney with the Finest Hours and Sony Pictures releasing with Brothers Grimsby, and there are more on the horizon. And with that, I'll pass the baton to Chris to talk about some of the real-world results from that testing.
Hey, gentlemen.
Yes, sir.
Before we transition to Chris, we have a few questions. Would you be willing to answer them?
Sure.
Yep.
Okay. Referring back to the EDCF testing, Tomas asks, why was it not encrypted?
The EDCF testing was not encrypted simply because we were trying to ease the distribution process and make it very simple for exhibitors to bring up new equipment. And I should add that obviously the feature test distributions were in fact encrypted.
Okay. Our guest Tom asks, in the scope of, or in a scope wider than DCP, distribution and playback, does SMPTE DCP contain a UID for a movie that could be the basis to interface with third-party systems, e.g. POS, digital signage?
There are a number of identification mechanisms built into the SMPTE DCP format. Obviously, there's the composition playlist UUID, but we've also added support for multiple content version IDs. So there is a lot of capability for version tracking baked into the format that I believe initially will probably be leveraged most by the studios and the distribution entities that they work with. But, you know, I believe that the tracking will eventually trickle down effectively into the exhibition community.
To the question about encryption, our good friend Walter Arrighetti says, "Hello, Nick. We've been rolling out encrypted SMPTE DCPs for more than a year in Italy, but without subtitles, and have had a very low number of problems, almost none." And let's see, the last question is from good friend Bill Beck. What percentage of screens are converted, and what is the magnitude of the remaining transition?
You know, this is a tough question to answer, and it's one of the challenges that we've got ahead of us in sort of tracking and updating the TDL trusted device list to reflect this data. I think that a lot of the systems, a large majority of the systems, with a software update are SMPTE ready. There may be some challenges associated with audio routing and things along those lines, but I believe that most of the deployed systems out there can be upgraded to support SMPTE on a basic level.
Thank you. I'll hold the last couple of questions to the Q&A period.
All right, so we're going to go into the real-world results. This is Chris now. So Disney, back in 2015, decided that we wanted to push the effort to transition to SMPTE delivery. At that time, the standards had essentially been finalized for 6 years, and we wanted to move the industry forward. Nick has mentioned many of the benefits, the fact that we can point to a standard and not sort of an ad hoc gentleman's agreement, and then some of the additional functionality that's supported not in Interop but in SMPTE in terms of, you know, for instance, the high dynamic range and immersive audio capabilities, as well as the CPL metadata, the composition markers and such. And so we identified McFarland USA as our first title, and we started talking with exhibitors months in advance of that release to kind of let them know. We messaged through NATO, through ISDCF meetings, communicated with technical contacts at the various chains, and what we decided to deliver was a very basic SMPTE package, very basic feature set. We didn't add a lot of the bells and whistles. We just wanted to make sure that we could effectively transition to SMPTE package delivery. And so what we delivered was very much what we're identical, or not identical, but similar to what we're delivering today in Interop, but in a SMPTE package with SMPTE track files and SMPTE control files, the composition playlist, the packing list, and the asset map. We decided to manage this by sending out both Interop and SMPTE packages. We delivered to satellite-only sites because of the flexibility that allowed us. And what we did was we delivered SMPTE packages, and we also delivered Interop, but we kept the Interop unpublished, only to be published in the event that we had a significant number of problems that couldn't be resolved. We didn't want to risk the title. So we sent out to a little over 1,000 locations a week ahead of time for testing. The testing identified some audio issues primarily that were all solved with software updates. And then when we sent the final release, we didn't actually send the final release, it was already there, but when we opened the keys for the final release to 778 locations, there were very few problems. I think probably 4, maybe 5 issues that only affected the first screening of the first night. So we viewed this as a rousing success, just in terms of demonstrating that SMPTE could be delivered effectively to locations. This was followed with Monkey Kingdom in March of 2015. It was an identical release pattern, identical release process. We sent Interop as a backup. We sent the test delivery a week early to a little over 1,100 locations. By this time, everyone was well aware of what was going on, and so it was a very uneventful release. In fact, because of the messaging and the early release, I would say it was probably had fewer problems than most typical Interop releases. So we sat for a while. One of the things we didn't want to do was impact a large tentpole release, and so the next release that we felt gave us enough lead time. Remember, we obviously can't do this on a title that's finishing at the last minute. We don't have enough time to message ahead of time. We don't have enough time to send it out a week early and do any of the testing. And so the next release that we were able to test this with was Finest Hours, and that was just a couple of months ago. For this title, we expanded the feature set to include many of the things that Nick went over earlier. CPL metadata, we put markers in for first frame of composition, first frame of end credits, first frame of moving credits, and last frame of compositions. We added a ratings list, and we added a feature MCA label description both in the MXF and in the CPL, and what that has the potential to do is allow systems that are knowledgeable to make decisions about audio routing, and it would be theoretically unaffected if the system isn't aware of the data and whether to do anything with it. In the many months since our last SMPTE release, DTDC had obviously brought a large number of exhibitors on board into their satellite footprint. So the number of exhibitors had increased from 15 to 41. The locations that we delivered to were right around 2,000. And so we messaged everyone in advance, again, as we did before. And the results were, the results were that the slide didn't move. So the results were that we had numerous ingest issues. Those were, yeah, I got, back. We had a number of ingest issues related to the CPL metadata and the markers. These were, the way that they're presented in the composition playlist could lead a system to believe that it's referencing a track that is missing, and so some of those, not servers, but primarily theater management systems or library management servers had some issues with that. We had closed caption playback issues related to two things. There was a language code that's perfectly legal, but not one that we have typically used. We've typically used the two-letter language code, and in this case we used a EN-US as a language code, which caused some closed caption equipment to interpret it as a language other than English and put it on a different track. In addition to that, the encrypted closed caption track files caused some issues with some software. We had a number of issues with audio configuration, and that, remember, we increased from 15 to 41, and so those first 15 exhibitors that we had already walked through the audio routing issues, we now had another 30 or so that hadn't experienced this in the past. So there were a number of software-related audio configuration issues, primarily related to the hearing impaired and visually impaired tracks not being available to the patrons. Virtually all, as Nick pointed out in his review of some of the test releases in Norway and Netherlands, virtually all the issues were related to software that was not up to date. For this title, because we had so many, and I would, when I say so many, there were probably 15 or 20% of the locations that were reporting issues. we published the Interop DCP that we had delivered and made it available to everyone who was having any problems. The result of this was, even though we had all of these problems and Deluxe Technicolor had to scramble to handle all the call volume, the fact is we lost very few shows. I think, again, it was on the order of magnitude of 4 or 5 shows on the first night. So next steps. What we are engaged in, we obviously shared our experience freely and openly with everyone that would listen. So we shared it with representatives from NATO. We've shared it at ISDCF meetings. The information has been shared at EDCF meetings, and we will talk to anyone who will listen at CinemaCon. I would point out that what we're trying to communicate is really essentially upgrade your software. If your software is updated and if you have tested with the test packages that are available for download on ISDCF websites, if you successfully do that stuff as an exhibitor, then our content will play without any issues. Integrating best practices into the mastering process. Basically, we've learned some lessons. It was a good thing that we did this, I think, that we pushed the envelope and tried this other, adding metadata and some other features in. It exposed some issues out in the field that we wouldn't have otherwise known about. We can now talk about and communicate with mastering vendors and make sure that they're aware of the practices they need to engage in. We understand that there's going to be a release later this spring from another studio, and I call it sharing the pain. You know, Disney is happy to, you know, we're looking forward to pushing the envelope and helping move the industry forward. We welcome anyone to jump in the pond with us and have fun. Our goal is a wide release by the end of 2016, and by that, I think we're expecting to go beyond satellite to hard drive delivery. And with that, I'm going to turn it back to Nick, who can go over the SMPTE summary, and obviously if Joel has fielded any questions, we can answer those questions as well.
Thanks, Chris. Yeah, so in summary, you know, SMPTE DCP brings fundamental changes to the DCP data structure. It provides a formal environment to work through the challenges that arise. It brings new feature sets, including subtitle track file MXF wrapping, encryption, CPL metadata, and markers, and all of the immersive cinema formats that we described earlier. One of the important things to remember is that it cannot be mixed with Interop packages. They need to remain mutually exclusive. SMPTE featured releases are planned for the US and EMEA. DTDC, and I think I speak for Chris by saying Disney is 100% committed to supporting the initiative, and with any luck, 2016 could be the year it finally happens, although maybe not April. That's it. Thank you guys very much.
And thank you, gentlemen, and thank you to your organizations for supporting SMPTE's standards and the DCP specifically. I have a couple of comments before I get into the questions here. Walter follows up on what he said previously and said, I can confirm to you guys for your benefits that the issues we found in our tests and real-world distribution with SMPTE DCPs were also in Italy related to audio versus software updates and only for a specific server make. Let's see.
Yeah, we hear that a lot. Thank you, Walter, and thank you for joining this morning. That information is extremely valuable.
My SMPTE home office teammate, Mauricio Roldan, says that SMPTE will provide a D-Prove 2 and distribution KDM to any chain that requests it. And for anybody who's not familiar with the term D-Prove, it stands for Digital Projection Verifier. So you'll get one of those when you request it. Let's see, going to the top. Back to the testing. Thomas follows up with his question, were the eSubs encrypted?
I don't believe we did encrypted subtitles because we have awareness of some known issues at the moment. But they are working through those issues, and we hope to have fully encrypted subtitles in some of the distributions this year.
Okay, great. Matthew asks, and I can follow up on this, are you aware of anybody working on the standards that has been in contact with digital signage providers like BrightSign?
Not specifically, no.
Okay. Bill asks, is a location, when you were speaking about location in your presentation, does that equal a screen or a multiplex?
That refers to a multiplex, so it could be 18 screens, but we're talking about locations in that case.
Okay. Let's see. Marcus asks, the theaters would...
Actually, I should, Joel, very quickly, I will say that the Grimsby was released with encrypted subtitles, the Sony Pictures releasing title.
Oh, okay. Good. Thank you. Let's see. Marcus' question, the theaters which participated in the SMPTE testing, how much of a percentage were independent theaters, or were all of them like an AMC or Regal theater?
So for the titles in the U.S., with the 41 theaters or the 41 chains that we delivered to, yes, there were a mix of big chains and smaller exhibitors included.
Great. And I'm gonna allow you to defer this question if you would like. But Kim asks, do we suspect there will be a new VPF rollout for exhibitors to upgrade their systems?
I'm not in a position to answer that question. I'm a technical guy here. So essentially deferring the question.
That's fine. Let's see. Marcus has a question here. No, we already answered that one. A follow-up from my colleague Mauricio. He says the SMPTE D-Prove has Interop plus SMPTE DCP, and D-Prove 2, which release is imminent, will be DCP only and will include subtitles, etc. And D-Prove is encrypted. Let's see. I think feature in SMPTE and trailer. Johan wants to know if features in the SMPTE DCP and trailers will have Interop on the same drive.
So, speaking for Disney, and as Nick has mentioned, there is difficulty putting Interop and SMPTE on the same drive. Disney would never see a need to deliver both Interop and SMPTE on the same drive. If we were delivering a SMPTE feature, we would deliver SMPTE trailers with it. I should point out, in case anyone has any question about this, when we say you can't mix Interop and SMPTE, we're talking for delivery and ingest. In actual playback on a server, you're free to mix Interop and SMPTE compositions in the show playlist, and it should play without any issues.
Thank you. Walter follows up, did you do any 25 frame per second compatibility tests?
We did not.
Okay.
I believe that the EDCF initiative did have some 25 frame per second packages, though.
Great. And that appears to be the final question from our audience. Let's see. Thomas follows up with a comment. We did in Europe with DProve 2. Thank you, Thomas. There are no further questions, so I guess with that, we shall close. And I'd like to, well, before I do, there is one last question from Lucas. Is any SMPTE DCP authoring training available? SMPTE is actually considering a course on implementation of DCPs through the Home Office. We're not planning any DCP authoring, but it's certainly something that, as Director of Education, I would be interested in learning to see if there is something out there. Are either of you two gentlemen aware of anything out there to help people learn how to author DCPs?
I'm not aware of training unless you were to perhaps get a job at Deluxe Technicolor. I do know of ISDCF has been talking about putting together some educational kind of frequently asked question type information that would be available to people. We do recognize that it's helpful to have an educated group of people who are mastering. It's probably not targeted at the large vendors, but more at the smaller folks who are delivering content to film festivals or working on smaller titles who then end up forwarding those on to Deluxe Technicolor for distribution. You know, there is a lot of misinformation out there on the internet. You know, all the way to, hey, color space doesn't really matter, just package it and it will work reasonably well. So, you know, pay attention to what you're reading, and I would say go to ISDCF and there you might find some information there. We're talking about more educational material.
Okay, good. And our good friend Jim Whittlesey just commented that gave me a name of someone I should speak to, because the plan is to develop this course for delivery later in the year, and I've already been in touch with at least one subject matter expert. So Jim, I probably will circle back with you as well. So Chris, Nick, thank you very much for your time. Thank you to our guests for participating. I will send a follow-up email with a link to the feedback form, and the feedback form, once you submit it, will automatically redirect you to a PDF of the slides used today. With that, thank you everybody. If you're traveling to NAB and hopefully the Future of Cinema Conference, which is occurring 2 weekends from now, we'll see you there, and safe travels, take care, and talk to you soon. Thanks everybody.